Marcus Chen had always prided himself on having the most well-maintained lawn on Maple Street. Every Saturday morning at precisely 7 a.m., he could be found with his vintage push mower, creating those perfect diagonal stripes that made his neighbors secretly envious. His front yard wasn't just grass. It was a masterpiece of suburban perfection, complete with carefully manicured edges and a sprinkler system that had cost him 3 paychecks but delivered results that could grace a golf magazine cover. That's why, on the first Tuesday of October, Marcus nearly choked on his morning coffee when he glanced out his kitchen window and saw it. A massive white Escalade parked squarely in the middle of his precious lawn, its chrome wheels sinking into the soil he'd spent 5 years perfecting. "What the hell?" Marcus muttered, setting down his mug so hard that coffee sloshed onto his granite countertop. He rushed outside, his house slippers slapping against the wet pavement as he approached the vehicular invasion of his horticultural sanctuary. The SUV sat there like some kind of metallic beast that had wandered onto his property to die. Deep tire tracks scarred the earth where the driver had clearly accelerated onto his lawn, and Marcus could already see brown patches forming where the weight of the vehicle was crushing his carefully cultivated Kentucky bluegrass. As if summoned by his mounting rage, the front door of the house next door, which had been sold just 3 weeks ago, swung open. Out stepped a woman in her mid-40s with bleached blonde hair pulled into an aggressive ponytail and the kind of athletic wear that screamed, "I demand to speak to your manager," even in casual conversation. She clutched a bedazzled phone case in one hand and a venti coffee cup in the other, walking with the confident stride of someone who had never been told no in her entire life. "Excuse me," Marcus called out, gesturing toward the automotive intruder on his lawn. "Is this your car?" The woman, who would later introduce herself as Karen Whitmore, barely glanced in his direction as she approached the Escalade. "Obviously," she replied with the kind of casual dismissiveness usually reserved for telemarketers and expired coupons. "Well, it's parked on my lawn," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice level despite the growing knot of frustration in his chest. "My front yard isn't a parking space." Karen paused with her hand on the driver's door handle, finally deigning to look at him directly. Her expression suggested she was looking at something particularly unpleasant she found on the bottom of her designer sneaker. "Look, I don't know what the big deal is. It's just grass. They'll grow back." Marcus felt his eye twitch, a nervous habit that only emerged when he encountered levels of stupidity that challenged his faith in humanity. "Just grass? I've been working on this lawn for 5 years. Do you see these tire tracks? This is going to take months to repair." "Listen," Karen said, her voice taking on that particular tone that retail workers worldwide had learned to fear. "I'm running late for my Pilates class, and the street parking situation here is ridiculous. I'll move it later when it's more convenient." She climbed into her SUV, started the engine with a roar that seemed unnecessarily aggressive for a Tuesday morning, and proceeded to back directly over Marcus's prized rose bushes before pulling away, leaving him standing in the wreckage of what had been his perfect lawn just 5 minutes earlier. As he surveyed the damage, the deep ruts, the flattened grass, the rose petals scattered like confetti across his driveway, Marcus realized he wasn't just dealing with an inconsiderate neighbor. He was dealing with something far more dangerous. A Karen in her natural habitat, and she had just declared war on his property. Marcus thought Tuesday's lawn invasion was a one-time incident. He was wrong, spectacularly, devastatingly wrong. Wednesday morning arrived with Karen's Escalade planted in the exact same spot, this time accompanied by a cherry-red BMW that belonged to someone Marcus had never seen before. Both vehicles sat on his lawn like mechanical vultures, their combined weight creating an even deeper crater in what used to be his pride and joy. This time, Marcus didn't bother with coffee. He marched outside in his pajamas, his anger having evolved overnight from frustrated bewilderment to righteous fury. Karen was loading yoga mats into her SUV while chatting with a brunette woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a suburban mom Instagram filter. "What exactly you think you're doing?" Marcus demanded, his voice carrying across the morning air with the authority of a man who'd reached his breaking point before 8 a.m. Karen looked up with the same expression she might wear if a pigeon had just asked her for directions. "Oh, hi. Mike, right?" "Marcus?" "Right, Marcus. This is my friend Jessica. We're carpooling to hot yoga." She gestured toward the brunette as if this explained everything. "Jessica, this is the neighbor I told you about, the one with the grass obsession." Jessica giggled, actually giggled, like they were discussing Marcus's collection of garden gnomes rather than his destroyed property. "Oh my God, Karen told me about you. You're the lawn guy." Marcus felt that familiar eye twitch return with a vengeance. "I'm the homeowner whose property you're both parked on illegally." "Illegally." Karen's perfectly contoured eyebrows shot up toward her hairline. "That's a pretty serious accusation, Marcus. Do you have some kind of law degree I don't know about?" I don't need a law degree to know that parking on someone else's private property without permission is trespassing, Marcus replied, his voice dangerously calm. And if you look at your tire tracks, you'll notice you've also destroyed about $300 worth of landscaping. Karen exchanged a look with Jessica that somehow managed to be both conspiratorial and condescending. Listen, Marcus, I get that you're upset about your little garden, but maybe you need to consider the bigger picture here. We're all neighbors, right? We should be helping each other out. Helping each other out? Marcus repeated, wondering if he'd accidentally stumbled into some alternate dimension where words had completely different meanings. How exactly is destroying my lawn helping me out? Well, Karen said, settling into her driver's seat with the confidence of someone who had never lost an argument in her life, parking is really limited on this street. And honestly, your lawn is just sitting there doing nothing most of the time. It's kind of wasteful, if you think about it. Marcus stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish that had suddenly discovered it could breathe air but wasn't sure what to do with this newfound ability. Wasteful? It's my lawn, on my property, that I pay taxes on. Right, but it's not like you're using it for anything important. Jessica chimed in, apparently feeling the need to contribute to this masterclass and entitled Logic. I mean, what do you actually do with it? Look at it. I maintain it. I enjoy it. I invested years of work into creating something beautiful, Marcus said, his voice rising despite his best efforts to remain calm. And more importantly, it's mine. Karen started her engine, the sound drowning out whatever Marcus might have said next. She rolled down her window just enough to call out, "We'll try to be more careful about the tire tracks, okay? But you might want to consider loosening up a little. It's just grass, Marcus. It's not like it's irreplaceable." As both vehicles pulled away, Karen's SUV leaving fresh gouges in his lawn and Jessica's BMW adding a few artistic squirrels to the destruction. Marcus stood in his driveway feeling like he'd just witnessed his neighbor explain why stealing his mail was actually a community service. That evening, Marcus walked the perimeter of his property, surveying the damage by the light of his porch lamp. The lawn that had taken him 5 years to perfect now looked like a small battlefield. But what bothered him most wasn't the physical destruction. It was the casual dismissal of his property rights, the entitled assumption that his space existed for Karen's convenience. As he headed back inside, Marcus noticed Karen's kitchen light was on, and he could see her silhouette moving around inside, probably planning tomorrow's yoga session and discussing which section of his lawn would make the most convenient parking spot. Marcus Chen was a patient man. He believed in communication and being reasonable and giving people the benefit of the doubt. But as he stood in his doorway looking at the ruins of his once perfect lawn, he realized that patience had its limits. And Karen Whitmore was about to help him discover exactly where those limits were. Marcus had always believed that reasonable people could solve reasonable problems through reasonable discussion. This optimistic worldview was about to be thoroughly demolished by a week of Karen's increasingly creative interpretations of property rights. Thursday morning brought a new development. Karen had apparently decided that Marcus's driveway was also fair game. Her Escalade now straddled the line between his lawn and his actual parking space, effectively blocking him from getting his own car out of his garage. When Marcus knocked on her door at 7:30 a.m., still in his work clothes because he couldn't leave for his job, Karen answered in a silk robe with a face mask that made her look like she was auditioning for a horror movie. "Marcus, honey, it's barely dawn," she said through the green goo covering her face. "Some of us value our beauty sleep." "Karen, I can't get my car out. You're blocking my driveway." "I'm not blocking anything. There's plenty of room if you know how to drive." She started to close the door, but Marcus put his hand against it. "I'm asking you nicely to move your car so I can go to work." Karen sighed with the theatrical exhaustion of someone being asked to donate a kidney. "Fine, but this is really inconsiderate of you. I have a spa day planned, and now I'll have to get dressed." By Friday, Marcus had reached his breaking point with polite conversation. He decided to try official channels. His first call was to the Homeowners Association, where he spoke to Margaret Hendricks, a woman whose voice suggested she'd been dealing with neighborhood disputes since the invention of the suburb. "Mr. Chen, I understand your frustration," Margaret said with the weary patience of someone who'd heard every possible variation of neighbor complaints. "However, our HOA agreement doesn't actually specify anything about parking on lawns. It's more of a general courtesy issue." "General courtesy?" Marcus repeated, staring out his window at Karen's SUV, which was now accompanied by what appeared to be a food delivery truck, whose driver was casually walking across his flower beds to reach Karen's front door. "She's destroying my property. Have you tried talking to her directly?" Marcus closed his eyes and counted to 10. "Yes, multiple times. She thinks my lawn is community property." "Well, you could file a formal complaint, but that would require documentation, photographs, witness statements." Margaret's voice trailed off in a way that suggested this process would take roughly as long as growing a new lawn from scratch. Next, Marcus tried the non-emergency police line. Officer Rodriguez listened patiently while Marcus explained the situation, occasionally making sounds that suggested he heard variations of this story approximately 10,000 times before. "So she's parking on your grass?" Officer Rodriguez confirmed. "Yes, and destroying landscaping that cost me thousands of dollars to establish." "Is she parking there overnight?" "No, usually just during the day." "And you've asked her to stop?" "Multiple times." There was a pause that Marcus was beginning to recognize as the sound of an official person trying to figure out how to politely explain that his problem wasn't actually their problem. "Mr. Chen, this sounds like a civil matter. Unless she's threatening you or causing significant property damage that rises to the level of criminal mischief, there's not much we can do from a law enforcement perspective." "What qualifies as significant property damage?" "Well, we need to document monetary damages, get estimates for repairs, establish a pattern of intentional destruction." Officer Rodriguez's voice took on the same weary tone as Margaret from the VOA. Saturday brought Marcus's most creative attempt at diplomacy, a handwritten note. He spent 20 minutes crafting what he believed was the perfect balance of neighborly friendliness and firm boundary setting. The note read, "Dear Karen, I hope we can work together to solve our parking situation. I understand that street parking can be challenging, but my front lawn has taken years to establish and costs significant money to maintain. The recent damage will require professional landscaping to repair. I'd be happy to discuss alternative solutions that work for both of us. Perhaps we could talk about options like street parking permits or shared driveway usage during specific times. I value having good relationships with my neighbors, and I'm confident we can find a solution that respects everyone's property. Sincerely, Marcus Chen." He placed the note in a decorative envelope and left it in Karen's mailbox, feeling pleased with his mature, solution-oriented approach. Karen's response arrived 2 hours later, written on the back of what appeared to be a Starbucks receipt. "Marcus, you're being ridiculous about some grass. It's not like you're using it anyway. Maybe try being less uptight. There's bigger problems in the world. K." Sunday morning brought the final straw in Marcus's diplomatic efforts. He woke up to find not just Karen's Escalade, but 3 additional cars parked on his lawn. Karen was apparently hosting some kind of brunch and had decided that his front yard made an excellent valet parking area. One of the cars, a lifted pickup truck, had driven so far onto his property that it was practically parked against his front porch. When Marcus stormed over to Karen's house, he could hear laughter and mimosa-fueled conversation coming from her backyard. Karen answered the door wearing a sundress and holding a champagne flute, looking like she was posing for a lifestyle blog about effortless entertaining. "Marcus, perfect timing. We were just talking about you. Get these cars off my property. Now." "Oh, come on, don't be such a party pooper. It's just for a few hours. Besides, I told everyone about your little grass obsession, and they think it's adorable." Marcus looked past her into the house, where he could see several women in similar sundresses, all looking at him with the kind of amused curiosity usually reserved for zoo animals performing tricks. "This isn't a request, Karen. Move the cars or I'm calling a tow truck." Karen's expression shifted from fake friendly to genuinely annoyed. "You know what, Marcus? I've been trying to be nice about this, but you're being completely unreasonable. It's grass. It grows back. Maybe if you spent less time obsessing over your lawn and more time developing some social skills, you'd understand that neighbors are supposed to help each other out." She closed the door in his face, leaving Marcus standing on her porch, listening to the sounds of her brunch party while 4 vehicles slowly sank deeper into his once perfect lawn. As Marcus walked back to his house, stepping carefully around the tire tracks that now crisscrossed his property like some kind of automotive crop circle, he realized that his faith in reasonable discourse had been completely misplaced. Karen Whitmore didn't speak the language of mutual respect and compromise. She spoke fluent entitlement with a minor and passive-aggressive manipulation. It was time for Marcus to learn a new language. Marcus spent Sunday night researching. Not HOA bylaws or city ordinances. He was done with official channels. Instead, he found himself deep in landscaping forums, irrigation websites, and surprisingly, a Reddit thread titled "Legal Ways to Make Your Property Less Appealing to Trespassers." The plan that emerged was beautiful in its simplicity and completely legal in its execution. Monday morning, Marcus called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. He had more important business to attend to. His first stop was Henderson's Hardware, where he loaded his cart with PVC pipe, sprinkler heads, a timer system, and enough landscape fabric to cover a small farm. His second stop was Murphy's Garden Center, where he had a very specific conversation with Tom Murphy about soil composition and water retention. "You want clay-heavy soil?" Tom asked, scratching his gray beard. "Most folks try to avoid that stuff. Makes for terrible drainage. That's exactly what I need, Marcus replied with the first genuine smile he'd worn in a week. The worse the drainage, the better. By Tuesday afternoon, Marcus had transformed the front section of his lawn into what any casual observer would recognize as a perfectly legitimate landscaping project. He'd installed a new irrigation zone specifically designed to water the area where Karen habitually parked. The system was programmed to activate at 2 a.m., 4 a.m., and 6 a.m., well within his rights as a homeowner maintaining his property. The clay-heavy soil was artfully arranged to look like natural low spots where water might naturally collect. To the untrained eye, it appeared to be a homeowner's earnest attempt at improving his lawn's growing conditions. To an engineer like Marcus, it was a precision-crafted trap that would turn any parked vehicle into a very expensive lawn ornament. The weather forecast showed scattered showers throughout the week, perfect conditions for Marcus' new rain garden to demonstrate its impressive water retention capabilities. Wednesday morning arrived gray and drizzly, with the kind of persistent precipitation that made everything look like a watercolor painting left in the rain. Marcus positioned himself at his kitchen window with a cup of coffee and the patience of someone who had spent considerable time and money setting up the perfect show. At 9:15 a.m., right on schedule, Karen's white Escalade came barreling around the corner. Marcus watched as she pulled into her usual spot on his lawn, apparently not noticing that what used to be firm ground now had the consistency of chocolate pudding mixed with regret. The Escalade's chrome wheels sank into the mud with a satisfying squelch that Marcus could hear from inside his house. Karen, apparently focused on her phone, threw the SUV into park and stepped out directly into what had once been solid earth and was now an ankle-deep mud trap courtesy of Marcus's new irrigation system and several nights of steady rain. "What the?" Karen's voice carried across the morning air as her designer sneaker disappeared into the muck with a sound like a very expensive plunger. Marcus took a sip of his coffee and continued watching. Karen tried to pull her foot free, lost her balance, and had to grab the side of her SUV for support, leaving muddy handprints on the pristine white paint. When she finally extracted her foot, her shoe remained behind, claimed by the bog that used to be Marcus's front lawn. Standing on one shoe in what was essentially a decorative swamp, Karen looked around with the expression of someone who had just realized that the universe was not, in fact, designed for her personal convenience. She hopped back to her SUV, presumably to move it, only to discover that her chrome wheels had achieved the kind of grip with Marcus's clay-enhanced soil that typically required industrial equipment to resolve. The engine revved, the wheels spun, mud flew in impressive arcs, decorating Karen's white SUV with abstract patterns that looked like a Jackson Pollock painting rendered in earth tones. But the Escalade remained exactly where it was, slowly sinking deeper into Marcus's perfectly legal water retention system. Marcus watched Karen pull out her phone, presumably to call for help, while she stood barefoot on his driveway looking like she'd been wrestling with a mud monster and lost. 20 minutes later, a tow truck arrived. Marcus emerged from his house, wearing work clothes and carrying a rake, playing the part of a concerned neighbor who had been doing some landscaping and was surprised to discover this unfortunate situation. "Oh wow, Karen," Marcus called out with what he hoped sounded like genuine sympathy. "What happened here?" Karen, who was now wearing mismatched shoes borrowed from her house and had mud streaks in her hair, turned to face him with the expression of someone who had just discovered that karma was not only real, but had an excellent sense of timing. "Your lawn," she said through gritted teeth, "has turned into a swamp." Marcus looked around his property with the confused expression of someone seeing it for the first time. I did just install a new irrigation system. And with all this rain we've been having," he shrugged helpfully, "I guess the drainage isn't quite right yet. I'll have to get someone out here to look at it." The tow truck driver, a weathered man named Eddie who looked like he'd seen every possible way for humans to get their vehicles stuck, was examining the situation with professional interest. "Ma'am, how exactly did you manage to park in what's basically a pond?" "It wasn't a pond when I parked here," Karen snapped. "It was just lawn." Eddie nodded with the patience of someone who dealt with impossible situations for a living. "Well, it's going to take some doing to get you out. Might need to call for a bigger truck. Clay mud like this, it's like nature's superglue." As Eddie made his phone calls and Karen stood dripping on Marcus's driveway, Marcus continued his innocent landscaping, occasionally glancing over with the expression of a neighbor who was trying to be helpful but wasn't quite sure what he could do about this unfortunate turn of events. Karen," Marcus said thoughtfully, pausing in his raking, "maybe while you're waiting for the tow truck, we could talk about that street parking situation. I've been thinking about our conversation and I might have some ideas that could work better for both of us." Karen's response was not suitable for a family-friendly neighborhood newsletter.